Joining us now on the program is the Detroit Red Wings beat writer for MLive, as the Red Wings are pushing for a playoff spot in the Eastern Conference in the National Hockey League, but of late have had some spells of hot and cold as they continue to compete on the ice. Ansar, thanks for joining us today.
I'm glad to be with you.
Yeah, glad to have you with us too, because it's an interesting time in Red Wings hockey. It's one of the few teams that we've had here in the Detroit area of late that's been right in that hunt for the playoffs. Of course, the Lions had a late playoff push in the fall and just came up short. And now the Red Wings in a kind of a similar situation. They were surging there for a while with a nice game against the New York Rangers last week, Thursday, 4-1 victory, a win against the Capitals before that on Tuesday, albeit without Alexander Ovechkin playing. But of late, that defense has really taken a turn for the worst as they've dropped a couple of games, given up 12 goals in the last two games, both to the Ottawa Senators, and then being shut out by the Lightning before that. So where is this Red Wings team at? Is it ready to compete for a playoff spot?
It's right on the fringe. Like you said, things were going well. Even in their Saturday game against Tampa Bay, they played a really good game and they really dominated that game. Vasilevsky stole it for the Lightning. They went into a key back-to-back with Ottawa. I think realistically hoping that if they could split, that would have been a good trip. Lost both, and not only is it the fact that they lost both, it's the way that they lost those games. They were really dominated physically, and just breakdown after breakdown defensively. Too many odd man rushes. They let the Senators basically roam free behind them for breakaways and really hung their goalies out to dry. It was really I describe it as a discouraging, for sure, discouraging trip. Kind of a slap in the face, really. Ottawa was 4 points behind them. Now they're tied with them. There are, I think, about seven teams that are in the hunt there for the final two, for the two wild card spots that are separated by 6 or 7 points. So the Red Wings are right on the fringe there. But certainly it's going to take, it's probably going to take like another run like they had before the stretch where they went on a 7-1 run, something along those lines to really get back into this thing.
And that's where it really comes back to the front office, or at least the discussion amongst fans, amongst pundits on the hockey front is what will Steve Yzerman do as we're approaching the trade deadline this weekend, an opportunity for the Red Wings that they really believe that this team can get into the playoffs and maybe even be competitive in the early rounds. Do they become buyers at the trade deadline, or are they looking at some of their impending free agents, like particularly Tyler Bertuzzi, as someone that they can trade and get some more assets and accelerate this rebuild in the offseason and look more toward next year as that point? So in your discussions with Steve Yzerman at the front office, with this coaching staff, where do they believe that they're at right now? Should we be expecting them to be buyers or sellers at this trade deadline?
Well, they keep their cards close to the vest there. Don't say a whole lot, really anything. So we're just left to speculate. But Bertuzzi really is the key guy there. He's the main trade chip, maybe really the only one at this point after they signed Oli Mata and Jake Wallman recently to extensions. So they're here. Those were two other pending unrestricted free agents that probably certainly would have drawn some interest in the trade market. But right now, it's Bertuzzi is the main one as far as their pending unrestricted free agents. And my guess is that if they do trade him by Friday, it's not going to be for futures. It's not going to be for draft pick or prospects or anything like that. I think they're going to want to bring in a player or two that can help them right away, uh, almost as a replacement for Bertuzzi, somebody that can step into the lineup right away and help them with this playoff push. And I don't believe it'll be a rental either. I don't think Steve Yzerman's in a position or wants to add a guy that he's just going to lose in the summer for nothing. I think it would be somebody who's under contract for at least another year or two, and ideally, as we saw them get pushed around in Ottawa, really the past two games, Bertuzzi is one of those few guys that can push back and plays with that grit and the physicality. So if they lose him, ideally they would like somebody who can kind of fill that void too. The problem is, the question is whether they can find that guy here in the next 48 hours. But I also think that if Steve Yzerman doesn't feel that he's getting a good return, that he'll basically just keep Bertuzzi and hope that the team can go on a push here. And basically, at that point, they would probably lose him for nothing uh, as a free agent, unless they can somehow over these next few months come to an agreement. But right now, from what I understand, they're pretty far apart and nowhere close to a contract extension.
And right now, there's some glaring holes in this Red Wings team. There's some glaring issues that really need to be addressed if this team's going to win games and compete to build those points in order to get into the playoffs as we're approaching the end of the season. Particularly the defense and the power play have been really a big issue of late. You wrote in your article about their trip to Ottawa, 1 for 12 on the power play against the Senators. That's after going 9 for 31 in their previous 9 games. That is a huge, huge difference and change for this team, and an element of the game of hockey that can be so critical, especially when you are giving up as many goals as the Red Wings have been of late, to stay competitive against some of these teams when they give you an opportunity. So should we expect, regardless of moving Tyler Bertuzzi, that Steve Yzerman and company may be also pursuing some improvements on the defensive side and getting some goal scorers that can be more effective on the power play?
Well, I don't think he's going to sell any future assets, at least not any high draft picks. For a temporary fix here uh, at the trade deadline. I think most of those kind of deals that he'd be inclined to do would be in the off season. Um, but you mentioned the power play and really special teams, both the PK and the power play. Those are areas that this team really struggled in the last few years. Left a lot of points on the table because both those special teams were pretty bad, and they'd shown during that recent stretch much improvement in both areas. And But it was basically, it was pretty bad, like you mentioned in the 2 games against Ottawa. The question is, it's possible that those could just be outliers, those 2 games, and maybe they are not quite as bad as they showed in those 2 games. But moving forward, certainly that's going to be key. That's going to be one of the keys if they can make another push here.
We're joined by Ansar Khan on today's edition of the Megacast, Detroit Red Wings beat writer with MLive. You can read all of his articles and keep up to date with the progress of this Detroit Red Wings hockey team on mlive.com/Red Wings, mlive.com/Red Wings. And as we talk about all this and the Red Wings being in that hunt for one of those wild card spots in the Eastern Conference, they're competing right now with the Islanders. They're competing right now with the Pittsburgh Penguins, who are in those slots, but also a lot of teams around them as they're currently standing at 66 playoff points alongside the Ottawa Senators, who they've played over the last couple of days. Sorry, 64 points with the Senators, and then 66 points being held by the Panthers. But looking at the schedule, they've got some tough matchups coming up, a lot of games against some of these teams that are also in the hunt. But mixed in with that, they got the top team in the Eastern Conference as well, in the Boston Bruins, a few matchups with them. So looking at the rest of the way that the Red Wings are going with this schedule, what's your thought? Just how much of a chance do they really have to be competitive enough against this crop of teams to push into that final couple of playoff spots in those wild card positions?
I think I would say it's a long shot. I think again, it's when all's said and done, it's going to be tight. There's going to be not there. And it's usually that way. There's not a lot of points separating uh, those last few teams that make it and the first few teams that miss out. It's always pretty tight, and I expect that's going to be the case this year. And I think they'll look back on these possibly these two games at Ottawa, not being able to get a split as really damaging. And like you mentioned, the schedule. As of a couple of days ago, I think it was rated the toughest remaining schedule in the NHL as far as their opponents' win percentage and points percentage. So it is a tough road to go, and now Philip Hronek was injured last night. It's possible that he could be out for a while. That's if injuries they had been healthy uh, until really the last couple of games here. If injuries start to pile up too, that's only going to add to what is a tough task. But ultimately, I think there's just too many teams there. I'm not sure what I haven't looked at the standings today, but I think there were maybe 5 points out of that second wild card spot. But I think when you have to leapfrog several teams to get there too, that just makes the challenge that much tougher, and it's going to be tough to get in there.
Yeah, Islanders and the Penguins currently sitting at 70 and 69 points, respectively. The Red Wings at 64, tied with the Ottawa Senators out of the Atlantic Division, chasing the Panthers at 66 points, the Sabres at 66 points, and even looking down at the Metropolitan Division with the Capitals at 64. Plenty of teams in the mix, and the Red Wings having several matchups with a lot of them as we approach the end of the season with the Red Wings' final regular season game on April 13th against the Tampa Bay Lightning. We're joined by Ansar Khan on today's edition of the Megacast, beat writer with the Detroit Red Wings with MLive, and you can find his articles on their website, mlive.com/Red Wings. And Ansar, looking at this season for the Red Wings, taking a step forward in some regards, but a lot of those problems that have been present over the last couple of seasons, particularly the defense, continuing to be an issue. How does this inform where Steve Yzerman and the front office may go this offseason, looking towards certainly the draft? And as you mentioned, those draft assets have been something that Steve Yzerman's been very keen to hold on to and build through the draft as he did in Tampa Bay, but also in free agency where last offseason he made several moves that did help progress this team in this current season.
I think what this team really needs, and it's easier said than done, but they need really a bona fide star up front. Dylan Larkin, certainly has been their best player for some time now. Certainly a very good player, but not the elite level star that you see a lot of these top teams have. Now, how do you get that? I don't know. Certainly. Somehow draft somebody who develops into that type of player. They haven't had, of course, a lot of lottery luck the past several years, but and they would have liked to have made a run at Bo Horvat, who would have essentially been their number one center moving forward had they been able to swing that deal with Vancouver. But instead, he went to the Islanders. That was a guy that they were looking at. Somehow they need to find that elite forward, because I think on defense, I think moving forward, they're going to be in pretty good shape there. When you've got Moritz Seider and then Simon Edvinsson, who they hope will make the team next year. A couple of big D-men to really anchor that unit for years to come. But they really need elite level, preferably center, an elite level center moving forward. And I do think that they will. Of course, this is Dylan Larkin also in the last year of his contract, but I don't think there's any reason to believe that they won't get him signed to an 8-year extension here, whether that's in the next couple of days or maybe more likely sometime before free agency.
And regardless, plenty of intrigue around this Detroit Red Wings team as they still have a little bit over a month left in their regular season and are right there in the mix for those final 2 wildcard spots in the Eastern Conference. Ansar, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, glad to be with you.